FM, broadcasting from the University of Winnipeg here in incredible Winnipeg, Manitoba, heart of Turtle Island, homeland to, oh my gosh, homeland to the Dakota, the Nakota, the Dene, the Métis, the Cree, the Ojibwe, the Oji Cree, and so many beautiful people. We've let our theme music play out this morning while we just get our morning guests on, and we want to welcome you to Wooden Spoons and to thank our fantastic Friday guests for getting us going this morning. And so while they do that, I will just say that I am your co-host this morning, Kristen Andrews, and I'm here with community nutritionist Mary Jane Eason. And every Friday morning we discuss topics of healthy living. We get to environmental issues. We get to all kinds of things about what's going on in our community and all sorts of other interests. And you have us here for the next hour. So bringing us up to 9 a.m. and Democracy Now! So if you're just waking up this morning, there's some beautiful rosy pink clouds in the sky. We're sitting at about 7 degrees, and we're headed today towards a high of about 13 or 14 degrees. So, the last remnants of what got us through an incredible week last week will melt away, surely, as we've got sunshine and highs in the 10s, 11s, 12s, and 13s over the next few days. So a fall reprieve, if you will. I just want to take a moment to say that on Wooden Spoons, we do recognize that all things are related. And it's with learning and awareness that we connect the dots that make up our world. We are also trying to bring you, of course, relevant issues, nutritious recipes, and exploring all kinds of topics that you won't, with perspectives that you won't find on the mainstream media. And it's been my pleasure these last few months to sit in here with Mary Jane, who never ceases to get incredible guests and all kinds of informative topics to jump in with us on these Friday mornings. Today's no exception. Of course, we do have some guests that we're just working to get on the line this morning, so bear with us while we do that. And we will be jumping in toward a little bit of our educational component towards the end of the program, and we will be continuing some talks that we started last week as well. And we'll get to a few announcements too. Good morning, Mary Jane.
Oh, good morning, Kristen. We're in the process of trying to get in touch with two guests this morning, who I will be introducing shortly. And what is happening is our telco system here in the station cannot accommodate two guests. So every time we get one, the other one gets knocked off.
We have guests with such incredible capacity of knowledge that it's almost too much for the old systems, eh?
So this is the dilemma this morning. But I believe we have somebody on hold this morning, and so we will proceed finally, and then we'll get to the second guest.
So we'll do our guests one at a time this morning.
That's what's going to happen, and we didn't want to do it that way. We wanted to have them all together, and as a conversation. But anyway, I will just do a little introduction, and we'll get to our first guest, who is Susie Molloy. Are you there, Susie?
I am, yes.
Oh, good.
How delightful. There we are. We've got our first guest.
Okay. So we can proceed. My goodness, what a beginning. So during May of this year, which was designated Chemical Sensitivities Month, we interviewed Marie LeBlanc and Marg Friesen, who shared the disabling effects of hypersensitivities to environmental triggers. These effects are physiological or metabolic reactions, as well as being mentally and emotionally distressing. And of course, there are the sociological effects of being restricted in where one can go or not go. These sensitivities are experienced by a small percentage of the population. Some say 6%, but there are other much higher percentages that are recognized as being more valid. And this is the result of technological and scientific advancements that we see today. And so today we have a return guest, Marie LeBlanc, and another guest, Susie Molloy, who both experienced multiple chemical sensitivities. And both of these guests could be affected by exposure to something that will cause symptoms to discomfort and disorientation and possibly pain. So we'll be doing 2 separate interviews to talk to Marie LeBlanc and Susie Molloy, who is on first, about the different facets of multiple chemical sensitivities and how this condition affects the most basic things in their lives: shelter, being able to procure food, access medical care, and being able to live a normal life. Both women are strong advocates for people with chemical sensitivities. And Susie Molloy has been able to find housing that is suitable to her needs in a housing development in Arizona. And we are talking to Susie shortly about her work in the development of chemically and electromagnetically safe housing. And later we're going to talk to Marie LeBlanc about her own challenges with multiple chemical sensitivities and about a new video that she has produced called Environmental Illnesses, Environmental Sensitivities, and the 2019 Canadian elections. So welcome to Wooden Spoons, Susie.
Well, thank you very much.
And you are in Arizona.
I am, yeah. I'm in the high desert in northeast Arizona.
That's quite incredible. Anyway, do you want to describe the symptoms that you experience when you are exposed to triggers that you encounter in the environment, and how your sensitivity started, and what were the triggers, and how have these sensitivities affected your lifestyle?
Well, that's a lot to ask. I'll give it my best shot.
Yes.
The symptoms became disabling for me in 1981. Where I had some symptoms before that, during the late 70s especially, and I'm not sure what the triggers were. I know that among them was that I was in an urban environment and I traveled a lot in the prior 3 years and had vaccinations and lots of exposures to pesticides, as well as probably some diseases. I don't know what they would have been. I was on quinolin to keep from getting malaria, and had, like I said, numerous exposures to insecticide traveling, and I know that was a factor. Also, my diet was terrible. Typical United States diet in the 80s, lifestyle issues that couldn't have done me any good. And I have had celiac disease, evidently since childhood, and didn't know it, so I was eating the wrong things. And then I started developing resistance rapidly in 1981 and began being hospitalized in emergency rooms to keep me from dying. And after I stabilized a little bit, the symptoms turned into more chronic problems with dysarthria. My speech was disturbed. For several years I was in a wheelchair on oxygen a lot of the time to go out of my apartment, and I had some disorientation, and part of that was due to exposures, and when that wasn't the case, sometimes I believed that they were due to the terror or the post-traumatic stress disorder that a person has to live with daily with this kind of disease. I didn't know what it was called. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I just knew that I was made sick by so many things in the environment, most of my food, molds, all my clothing, any kinds of cosmetics, of course, like shampoo or soap, and any chemicals or electrical exposures. Like I remember one time going to a bank and being felled by the computers that were on the desk of the teller. Small things like that were just devastating. I moved from a friend's back porches into a car, into friends' yards. I lived in my parents' bathroom for some time because it was the least furnished room in the house. Since the elements in a bathroom are tile and porcelain, I was able to manage in there. And my mother at that point was collecting rain for me to drink and cook with. It was just a very odd time, and I didn't know that other people had this illness for a couple more years.
And you didn't even know there was such a thing as environmental disease, I guess. I mean, that was not even. So this must have been a very terrifying experience, a nightmare for you.
Yeah, I was frightened, and I didn't know other people had this disease, like I'd mentioned. And finally, I read an article in, I think it was the San Francisco Chronicle, about a doctor named Phyllis Safer in, I believe she was in Berkeley, California, who had this illness. And the article said that she treated people with it, and they couldn't really get well, but they could get some relief. And I couldn't get to her because I couldn't leave the house at that point and didn't have the money to go see her anyway. But I carry that article. I've still kept it just because it was so precious to me to finally get a breakthrough in my own ignorance. And from that point, I found other people and began to go to some, I made it to 2 support group meetings. I just couldn't leave my room when I was in San Francisco to go out and see people. And even getting groceries was an absurd ordeal.
Oh, for sure, because you have to be out there. We're listening to CKUW 95.9 FM, aired from the University of Winnipeg, and this is Wooden Spoons. We are talking to Susie Molloy, and we are talking about chemical sensitivities, environmental disease, whatever you may like to call it. So, Susie, you are involved with chemically and electromagnetically safe housing for people who have chemical sensitivities and electromagnetic sensitivities. And you want to tell us about the housing, and I'm not sure if you have how you have been involved or if you're developing these houses yourself, or would you want to describe your involvement with safe housing for people who have this type of modern type of illness to all the chemicals in our modern times?
Sure, I'll give it a try. There was a period when I was first ill when I just cared about staying alive. Later, when I started meeting other people who had this sort of reaction to chemicals and electromagnetic fields, there was a period of growth of support groups, and that was all over the country. I imagine in Canada too, certainly in Sweden and several northern European countries, and Australia. And it seemed as though after the first couple of years with our support groups, we sort of graduated as a group from being concerned to find organic carrots or organic oatmeal or something like that to eat, and air that was reasonable to try to breathe, different parts of the country to move to. And very clearly, our most obvious need at that point was housing. And the organic food was sort of coming along. We'd learned to go to each other for farming, produce and things like that. But the housing was just urgent. And we found ourselves living in project housing, which in the United States at least means that it was government housing for people who were impoverished or disabled. And for the most part, people who were not financially independent wound up in pretty horrible straits. In those days, it was common for the neighbors to smoke and later for them to have computers or Wi-Fi or different sorts of practices that were very detrimental to us. You know, somebody could spray paint their car or run their motor, for example, just small things like that, near our apartment. And the only thing to do at that point was to grab what we could, grab ID and box of crackers or whatever you could, and get out of the house and usually never go back. It was a violent eviction. It was effectively an eviction. If someone moved into a unit next door who was a smoker, for example, or who used cleaning products that we could use, things like that, we were evicted time after time after time. And after a while, I realized that we had to do something about permanent housing. And there was a huge movement beginning, especially at the end of the 90s, and then up until now, of people who were doing doing what they called green building. And that was unsatisfactory for us for the most part. We couldn't afford it. It was not employed in multifamily housing, and that's what we could afford if we had government benefits or an extremely low income. I was able to find people in the San Francisco Bay Area who would work with me on finding or building or retrofitting some apartments. We felt that we needed a building that would be dedicated to our use only, where we could isolate from other folks. We were able to raise well over $1 million in the San Francisco Bay Area and got a house built, an 11-unit apartment complex with separate laundry and separate community room. And that was somewhat successful at the time. It's called Ecology House in San Rafael, California, and it's since become part of the suburbs. People have moved into that neighborhood, which originally was a pretty clean area next to the bay. Now it's much more compromised because of the neighborhood. However, it's still a complex where there are no pesticides used. People don't use Wi-Fi. There's a power line that runs behind the building over the parking lot, but you can avoid that to some degree. But the neighborhood that's grown up around it is so-called modern, with modern so-called advantages, and it's a problem. It's still better than what we would have had it not worked out. That one was opened in '94. Like I said, in San Rafael, California, and we were able to get money from Housing Urban Development and several foundations to do that. I moved to Arizona just for health reasons, and I was done with graduate school and was pretty exhausted in San Francisco, and was offered a room in someone's house down here in Arizona, and I thought, well, that's stupid. I don't want to live in the desert. I loved San Francisco, and I wanted to stay there. That was my home as an adult. Found myself down here, and when I got out of the car in Arizona after this excruciating long drive, I could feel that my balance was better, and I could walk after just the first few days, and my speech cleared up, and I didn't need oxygen. I'm at 6,000 feet altitude here, and the air was a lot cleaner. And I was so disappointed to find that I was going to move to the desert, but it had to be done if I was going to have a life. After a few years here, there were so many people coming here for the same reason that I had, for hope of a cleaner place to live. And I got a tiny little house built. It's about 700 square feet, which in this part of the world is pretty small, on a lot of acreage. It's high desert acreage, and it was cheap in those days, in the early 90s, because it's overgrazed ranch land with nothing much going on. So several of us were able to buy land. And at this point, these years later, enough people have come here and stayed for a few days and managed that we have quite a substantial neighborhood. There are probably, I suppose, about 30 households of us spread out in this area. And the people who were able to come here and live built their own houses or had them built. And, of course, that's a tragic approach for people who are low income. It just doesn't work. Anyone on government benefits or who was living at the mercy of family or something like that couldn't buy in. So once again, it seemed like the only thing to do was to build some rental units for low-income people, which we did. We have, after some participation by the housing agency in Arizona and more donations, we were able to build 4 rental houses here and a laundry area, storage area, and put it on 20 acres. So it's just like the first multifamily place. It's not good, but it's better than what we'd have otherwise, and it has sheltered a lot of people over the years.
Could you describe some of the features of this type of housing? What does it not have, for instance?
What it doesn't have would be any insecticide, pesticide, lawns, shrubbery that requires care with chemicals. We just left the desert as it is for the most part. And the housing has no carpet. If someone wants to bring in a small cotton area rug, they're welcome to, but we don't. We have only resilient flooring or mainly tile, and we have aluminum foil between ourselves and the sheetrock or any products like that, which is covered, of course, by various kinds of paint or plaster that people have found to be less toxic. And there are very few electronic devices in the building. There's no Wi-Fi. I had high hopes that we'd be able to build more units on that property, but so far we haven't managed to figure out how to do that. I think one of the main advantages to living there is that the neighbors don't use cosmetic products or washing products, laundry products that are problematic. And there are horse farms within a mile, and there are different exposures such as to horses that could make some people very sick. When the road is repaired 5 miles away, fumes come over to these houses just like they do to the rest of us, but at least they're not right in front of the house. Living with other people who have a similar range of sensitivities can be helpful. It gives us a home base where we don't feel as though we're very exceptional or mental health challenged. We know we're on solid ground. We know we have a home to go to. That means everything in the world.
And you have a diverse community. They're people from different backgrounds and so on, but they have that in common, the need to have a contamination-free environment as much as possible.
That's right. Nobody burns plastic. We don't have gas heat. Try to keep petrochemicals to a bare minimum. The electricity for some people, of course, could be a problem. So some of them live off grid.
That's quite amazing. There's a whole spectrum of things, and I know when you mentioned that when the onset of your illness, there were things you mentioned like pesticides, exposure, and different products and plastics and so on. You also mentioned vaccinations. Do you think perhaps vaccinations played a role in the development of your sensitivities, or is this just all a combination of so many things that eventually broke your immune system down?
I suppose that the vaccinations are a possible culprit. I don't know. I just don't know for certain the science involved. I know that several other people have figured out that vaccinations or immune boosters of one kind or another have contributed to their hypersensitivities or other illnesses. And I don't know 100% in my case. I'm sure they didn't help me, and I'm sure that the quinolin for malaria prevention probably had other effects. I'm just not positive.
As it is with everything, you just it's the whole gamut of things. So that's the tricky part of environmental disease, is that it's a reaction to so many different things combined that creates stress on the system, and I think the immune system breaks down. That's maybe an explanation. But also there was mention, and we're coming to the end of our interview with you, Susie, so that we could talk to Marie, who's probably wondering what's going on here. But there's mention that some people, when they come to the cleaner environment that you are living in Arizona, that that unmasks some of their hidden sensitivities. So all of a sudden, the air is cleaner, and hidden sensitivities start to surface. And do you want to comment on that and how that works its way out?
It seems, I think that what you've said is true. But in addition, moving to the desert is absolutely not the answer for everybody. There are people who come here and get sick from the vegetation or from the altitude, or it's so alienating, and they feel so estranged from their homes that they'd rather be sick in their homes where they came from, or they'd rather just keep looking. So this is not for everybody. And also, before we turn to Marie, I wonder if a lot of us are just going to get this illness. Our genetics, our genes and so forth are such that when we get born into this world and face the chemical and mold exposures and food sensitivities and so forth, we're so vulnerable. And there's no account taken for those of us with that kind of disease, I am one, or disability, to protect ourselves.
Have you any message to leave to our listeners right now before we go to Marie?
Be careful, respect your own symptoms. If you're starting to get sick, or if you feel there are places you can get better, respect that and act on it. Don't just sit there and be sick. If there's any way you can try something else. If you think it might be environmental, try to get out of your house and try to get out of your town and see if you might feel better someplace else while you still have time. Don't just sit there and get sicker and sicker.
Well, thank you, Susie, for sharing your amazing experiences with us and the work you have done. It's really phenomenal. And, so thank you again for joining us. And as we're going to play a song that I think that Kristen has selected.
It's a song that I'm not sure if it was Mary or Susie. One of these gals has got a website that has a lot of information about these symptoms and such. And the song is, from what I understand, a background song from the website. So it's called "Tall or Alone."
Okay.
So yeah, I'm not sure if that was your suggestion.
It wasn't.
Okay. Then we'll find out from...
I would like to mention that there's a website I like that's very down to earth. It's produced by people in this neighborhood called EI Wellspring. That's for environmental illness. So EI Wellspring is a good place to look for information about multifamily housing and single-family homes and different aspects of what it's like to live here.
Thank you for that information. It might be very helpful for people to know that.
It's very encouraging. As I happen to be an advocate for social housing and do a lot of work within the cooperative housing community here in Winnipeg. And I mean, from what I hear from your story, this is a story of resilience. It's a story of people coming together and finding what they need for suitable housing, which is very much the story of the cooperative housing movement here in Canada. So I only hope that perhaps we can find a Canadian a Canadian similar community that is operating here, and I'm glad that you've been able to find a home.
Thank you so much.
Okay, have a wonderful day out there.
Thank you.
And we'll go to that song now while we get our next caller on the line.
Okay.
Going down
And we've been listening to a song called Tall or Alone, which was a song at the suggestion of our very next guest who's joining us online this morning. Good morning. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
Beautiful.
Okay, everything is good again. So, yes, Marie, we're now going to be talking to Marie LeBlanc. There's our second guest, who we had introduced at the beginning of the program. And so, Marie, we just hung up on Susie Molloy about the housing in Arizona. Mm-hmm. So, would you like to share the challenges you and others with multiple chemical sensitivities face in assessing or accessing safe housing and safe shelter?
Yes. Like for us, housing is one of the most crucial elements. The problem with us is that MCS sufferers and other environmental illnesses are all different. We may be sensitive to mold, scent, pet dander, paint, building materials, and so on. One may be able to go inside, and one may be able to go outside. Many are homebound, many are homeless. Living with others is usually disastrous, and it's hard for us to find affordable housing that is environmentally suitable to meet our needs. I have been going from place to place and then finally having to live in my van, which is my transportation in my home. I've been looking for suitable, affording to low-toxic to non-toxic housing since the year 2000. The last place in Winnipeg in 2016 was leaking urine and feces behind the wall from an upstairs tenant the whole time I was living there. There was mold, fecal coliform, E. coli when I tested in my place. I had to boil my clothes. I was coughing to the point of almost passing out, and I was in major pain. The whole time I was living in that dwelling, I searched for a place to live. I had others searching for me as well who were becoming frustrated. I could not find a place to live that I could physically be in. I succumbed to throwing away my possessions because they were contaminated and began my journey of living a life of homelessness or being precariously housed. This began my most challenging part of my life, moving from place to place, living on couches and floors in my van. The places where I have stayed, I have met amazing people. I've approached organizations for help who can help people with housing. No one could help. I approached emergency shelters. Sometimes when we find a place where we think we can live in within a couple of hours, so a couple of days, if there is a toxin in the environment that we haven't been previously exposed to, our system will eventually have an adverse reaction to that toxin, and we can't stay there, and we're starting the whole process over again. A safe shelter would be awesome to have. It would be free of materials, any chemicals and materials that would off gas, such as furniture, and it could be nice to have, organic furniture.
Yes. Yeah, it is a tremendous challenge that you are facing. And, it's overwhelming.
And notice, it's an accessibility issue and like a medical need. The environmental, the Accessibility Act, that they had to review recently. I noticed it in Ontario. In the review, it says safe housing is described as the primary medical need of people with environmental sensitivities that is virtually impossible to find, leading in some cases to homelessness. Even with somewhat accessible home, a woman told how she has to remain housebound due to barriers outside. It's talking about how they're forced to have to live, other places. And this is great that the Ontario included that in their review.
That is an excellent step forward because there has to be awareness of this problem, and it sort of reflects back on what on earth are the rest of the people living with. If it's sort of a marker that we should be watching out for a lot of these things that they're not necessarily good to have in one's housing,
Yes.
And And there's a lot of misunderstanding or ignorance about multiple chemical sensitivities and electromagnetic hypersensitivities, and resulting in that these environmental diseases are often seen through the lens of psychiatry. Mm-hmm. And journalists have been known to affirm that people with environmental sensitivities are self-diagnosed, even though these people have been diagnosed by doctors. Physicians, do you want to comment on that situation that are faced by people with environmental disease?
Yes. It really does not serve us by putting multiple chemical sensitivities under the psychiatry umbrella. It's not like we're making things up. It just makes our lives harder to go into the office and sit on the chairs with the chemicals, become exposed, and then be getting medications that we can't handle. Like the majority of psychiatrists diagnose patients as a mental illness. The psychiatrists aren't adequately trained in diagnosing and treating multiple chemical sensitivities, so to them it looks like a mental health issue.
For which they'll give you medication. Yeah,
and then we can't handle it, and many are self-diagnosed because they're not as fortunate as myself, where I've been diagnosed by a medical professional out there who knows about multiple chemical sensitivity. I went to Nova Scotia to get diagnosed, and then came back to Manitoba.
So there's no physicians in Manitoba that can diagnose this disease?
They can diagnose it. At that time, I had to go to Nova Scotia to be diagnosed. I'm not sure what the reasoning was at that point in time. I've heard several things that they weren't allowed to diagnose. I've heard things like that. However, that's where I went to get diagnosed. I came back. I had a challenge receiving any treatment, and then a few years later I had to go out of province to find another environmental doctor. So there's no what Manitoba would require for people like us to be diagnosed is to have an environmental doctor there who could diagnose and treat. Get to that root cause and treat us. Mainly, the treatment is, for a lot of us, that the biggest step is housing.
Yeah, so that is something that doctors can advocate for or recommend, but they can't really help you there because that's another area. It has to do with housing policies and so on, and the development of the proper housing.
Mm-hmm.
Something.
Yeah.
And public education, of course, is so important in all this, and we have to be aware of all the things that are going into our housing in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And one never knows when one's body can break down under the stresses of too many things being inflicted upon it. And you did create a video, environmental illnesses, environmental sensitivities, and the 2019 upcoming election. Do you want to tell us about your video and what it has to share with people?
Yes, thank you. I feel the most basic needs are not being met, and the people are left to face a life of isolation, ridicule, and forced to be on the edge of society. In this video, I had 3 people living with multiple chemical sensitivities share their stories, and my friend Manfred Woodine, who has provided me with understanding and support, shared his views as well. My intent was to show how MCS can be disabling and is disabling. I give some facts and numbers so people are aware of the prevalence of the disease. I let sufferers know there are ways to get their votes counted if they can be at the polls, and I let politicians know that we are a rather large group of voters that could use their help. I look forward to the day someone can help me approach the World Health Organization to recognize multiple chemical sensitivity and other environmental illnesses to finally create the ICD code, which is the International Classification of Disease Codes in Canada, to make it easier when we're accessing medical care, housing, and social services, so we can begin to live a better quality of life.
Have you met any politicians or advocates that are interested in this issue and want to do something about it or recognize it as being a valid issue?
Yes. When I was in Manitou Beach presenting Who Says We Need Fresh Air, Naomi Hunter was she was there, and she's with the Green Party running for the federal election in Saskatchewan, and she saw the presentation and she supports it, and it felt really good to know that I felt very supported by speaking with her. So far, she's been the one person who understood what people with multiple chemical sensitivities were going through.
And so you know, living with this disease affects you in so many ways. And you mentioned that you're living in a van. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's hard for people to get their heads around. How does one live in a van in Manitoba? And how do you, what if you, like, there are a lot of risks involved. And then also, if you need to access medical help, how do you do that? What are the challenges? Do you want to just give us a picture of what you have to cope with?
Sure. Well, actually, now having a van, the challenge for public transportation is gone, except for the cost for gas. For getting medical attention, for doctors, it's not part of the curriculum to learn about multiple chemical sensitivities. Therefore, doctors are not adequately equipped to recognize or diagnose multiple chemical sensitivities. What I look for is scent-free facilities. So I will, phone up the doctor's office and ask, is it scent-free? And then I'll ask if they can make accommodations. If it's not, if they have a separate room I can go in, or that it can be treated in. There are only a few provinces in Canada that have medical clinics to help people with multiple chemical sensitivity where the environment is as safe as it can be. Nova Scotia, for me, where I was diagnosed, was the most environmentally safe clinic. Alberta is very safe. The environmental clinics are safe. It's still a challenge to be in an environment even when somebody else is coming in with scent-free detergent on their clothes, because there might be something I can't handle and they can. And more often than not, I choose not to go to emergency. When I'm thinking of going to emergency, I phone, I ask, can I go there? Can I wait in my van? I mentioned how ill I become from exposures to scents and cleaning chemicals and some electrical items and light. They can't accommodate me. One hospital was able to accommodate me.
So that should give a message to the medical system that there are people out there that they can't accommodate because of all these things in their environment. Does that create a bit of an awareness and a ripple effect? Do they even bother to consider that?
Well, they are, the medical community. They are aware of multiple chemical sensitivity. I know that Manitoba Health is aware of chemical sensitivities. Can you repeat the question?
Well, I'm just wondering, the fact that you're in contact with the medical profession, trying to get help sometimes, that they would be aware if their facility is not suitable for you. So that would, then that would make them start wondering what needs to be done to make it different.
Yes. Okay. So this makes me think of one time when I was referred to a heart specialist because this was how I was being affected. I went there. I actually phoned and asked about scent-free policies. So I went there and I started to have the heart symptoms, and the doctor actually could not see me because he couldn't accommodate the scent issues. So then I actually did start talking to him about multiple chemical sensitivity, and he had no idea that it could affect the heart and things like that, but he still refused to see me. And it felt good for him to know that he kind of was listening or hearing what I was saying, but I still couldn't receive treatment. And there's been times where I've seen doctors where they said that they couldn't treat me because they didn't know about multiple chemical sensitivities, or other ones who said, well, it's in my head, but then they couldn't find it on the computer. So because they can't find multiple chemical sensitivity on their computer, there's no billing fee code, they automatically go to it's psychiatric.
So there's a lot of gaps of information here, and that is really scary. And even environmental clinics, I haven't heard of them. I don't know if there's any in Winnipeg. No. So
no.
This is certainly an area that needs to be explored in terms of the offerings of the medical profession, because they're excluding a group of people, and a growing group of people. We don't even know the numbers of them. And maybe you could as we have to wind down a little bit because we're running short of time, you have a message you'd like to share with your listeners. Is there a message here that people like yourself are bringing to the forefront? just having multiple chemical sensitivities that are affecting people. Is there a message there, like that the fact that this disease exists? What is it telling us about our society, or what is it saying?
Oh, it's telling us you can't fool Mother Nature. Mm-hmm. We have people investing a lot of money creating chemicals and fragrances and putting them into produce and products that we ingest into our bodies, whether it's by eating, smelling, touching, or breathing. And sometimes there are no problems. But the myriad of chemicals and chemical combinations involved in our lives is like playing Russian roulette. Not everybody can tolerate every food. Not everybody can tolerate every chemical. At some point when we interact with the wrong chemical, things become terribly wrong for us and our system breaks down, and it's near impossible to make it right again. People with multiple chemical sensitivity are the warning signs of what could possibly happen to mankind if nothing is done to help the people now and in future generations. It redefines what food is. It teaches us to go with healthier and more natural choices. It teaches us that the manufactured products available are not necessarily good for us, even though it may seem to make our lives easier and our grass greener. It teaches us that we are nature and nature is us. And the less we stray from nature, the better our life will truly be.
Well, thank you so much, Marie, for joining us this morning and for sharing your video. Do you want to mention the name of it again? Your video. It's called. I have it here someplace. It's called
Environmental Illnesses, Environmental Sensitivities in the 2019 election.
There you go.
And also, people can take a look on my website, marieleblanc.net. The MCS Aware for the UK just wrote an article too, and apparently there will be an article coming up next week from somewhere I'm not mentioning yet until it's on my website.
Okay, that's good. And I think that we have come to the end of our time with you, Marie, and I really appreciate the fact that you are doing the work that you're doing, and I think you have a plan to continue your work. Your hopes for the future is in educating the public, is it not?
Yes, it is. I'm hoping that someday someone can help me figure out how to do a nonprofit, and I want to go across Canada with my Who Says We Need Fresh Air to create awareness, and I'm looking for funding for that too.
Okay. Well, you know what? It just might come to you. Maybe the time is right.
I need the funding to get the right van too.
Yes. Oh, thank you
so much.
Oh, thank you, and it's been a pleasure talking to you, and all the best. We'll keep in touch.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay.
And with just a few minutes left in this morning's program, we'll just remind you that you are listening to Wooden Spoons, broadcast from CKUW 95.9 FM here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And at the 18th of October, we've got what's shaping up to be a pretty beautiful day outside.
I know. It's just our little reprieve, and we're going to be in our second summer, Indian summer, for a little while anyway.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So we might have time for just a couple of quick announcements. We've only got a few minutes left. I just wanted to mention that the Friends of the Winnipeg Public Library book sale is coming up, and that's next Saturday. And this is a huge sale. It's a wonderful thing. This is a group that is separate from the library, that takes all the ex libris from the library and sells them, and the profits raised go back to our public library. So it's one of my favorite book sales of the year. So
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And
we have time for many more announcements.
Well, just very quickly, how to avoid eating GM salmon. The GM salmon is the first genetically modified animal that is being sold in Canada, but is not labeled as genetically modified. If you want to avoid eating GM salmon, what salmon should you buy? Buy only wild salmon. Do not buy farm salmon. Buy salmon from the seafood counter at these grocery stores. And then do not buy salmon. This is put on by the Canadian Biotechnology Action Network. There are a list of retailers that are not going to be selling GM salmon, and they have identified They aren't selling them now, and some of them are not planning to sell them in the future. So Costco is one of them. Federated Cooperatives Limited, another. IGA is owned by Sobeys. Loblaw. Metro.
Overweightia is an American chain
group, food group, Sobeys and Walmart. Also Longo's, which are not, they place their faith in the regulatory system of Canada, so they're not exactly endorsing it, but they have no plans at the present time. So just be aware.
It comes back to one of the things that we've talked about on the show so very much, and that is to know your farmer. Know your supplier, know your producer, choose organic, choose local,